Saturday morning. Garage half open. Cold air slipping in. You got pine boards on the workbench. Already cut twice. The sawdust is still on the floor from yesterday because you thought this time it would finally work. But one joint is off. Just slightly. Enough that the frame won't sit flat. Enough that you stop and you just stand there staring at something that was supposed to be simple. Not frustration at the wood, at the process. That moment where you realize you followed everything and still ended up nowhere. That's not a skill problem. That's something else. But here's the real question most people never think to ask. Why do two people with the same tools get completely different results from the exact same woodworking projects? Most people assume the problem is experience. If something doesn't fit, if a project collapses halfway through, if measurements don't line up, the default reaction is self-blame. But after years of looking at how woodworking projects actually fail, a pattern shows up that has nothing to do with skill. It's something far more consistent. The issue isn't the builder. It's the instructions they're following. There's an entire layer in woodworking that almost nobody talks about. The gap between what a plan shows and what it actually requires in real life. Somewhere along the way, plans stopped being built like instructions and started being designed like diagrams. And that shift changed everything. Because a diagram doesn't build a project. A system does. And when that system is missing, even experienced builders start running into the same invisible wall. It usually starts small. You print a plan for something simple. A bench, a cabinet, a table. Everything looks clean, measured, professional. You go to the shop, start cutting, and for a while, it feels right until step 3. That's where things start to drift. One measurement assumes lumber that isn't actually standard anymore. Another step skips the assembly order entirely. And suddenly you're improvising without realizing it. And this is where most people make a mistake that costs them days, sometimes weeks. They assume they misunderstood something. So they keep adjusting their work instead of questioning the plan. By the end, the project is technically done, but it doesn't feel right. Joints don't sit flush. Corners fight each other. And the worst part isn't the wasted wood. It's the thought that sticks afterward. I should be able to do this. Second scenario. Someone with a small garage shop. Limited tools. Table saw, drill, basic clamps. They try a more advanced project. Maybe a storage cabinet or outdoor structure. The plan looks detailed at first glance. But halfway through, missing details start showing up. No clear hardware breakdown. No real sequencing for assembly. No adjustments for real-world material tolerances. So they pause. Run back to the store. Buy extra material just in case. Try again. And the project stretches from one weekend into multiple weekends until it quietly stops being a priority. Not because it failed, but because it stopped making sense to continue. And this is where something subtle happens. They don't think this plan was incomplete. They think, I probably bit off more than I can handle. Even when that's not true. Third scenario. Someone more experienced. Years in woodworking. They know how to adjust on the fly. So they trust themselves more than the instructions. But that's where a different kind of problem shows up. They start compensating for weak plans without noticing it. Adjusting cuts. Fixing proportions. Reworking joints mid-build. It works until it doesn't. Because eventually, even experience runs into limits when the foundation is inconsistent. And what nobody tells you about experienced builders is this. They don't fail less often. They just recover faster from the same problems. Until a project finally pushes too far and gets abandoned anyway. And here's what all three of these situations have in common. It's not tools. It's not space. It's not skill. It's the structure behind the plan itself. Incomplete instructions create unpredictable outcomes. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. Because suddenly, the problem isn't the person in the garage. It's the system they're building from. After enough failed projects, something changes in how you look at the problem. You stop asking, how do I fix this build? And start asking, what would a plan need to include so this doesn't happen in the first place? That shift leads to a very different approach. Instead of guessing through diagrams, You start looking for systems that were actually built in real workshops, not just drawn up for presentation. That's where a large library of tested woodworking plans becomes relevant, not because it's more content, but because of how it's built. Every project follows a complete structure, step-by-step instructions, full material lists, cutting layouts, and assembly sequences that don't assume anything outside the instructions. The key difference is not volume, it's completeness. So the earlier problems start resolving themselves. That missing measurement issue, handled because dimensions are verified in actual builds. The stalled weekend project, reduced because each step is sequenced in real order, not theoretical order. The experienced builder overcompensating, less necessary because the instructions stopped leaving gaps in the first place. There was one case from a small garage setup, half a one-car space, basic tools, where a simple storage bench was completed in a single weekend using a fully structured plan. No adjustments, no redesign, just execution. And that's when it becomes clear. The difference is in effort. It's whether the instructions were ever complete to begin with, and once that's in place, woodworking stops feeling like problem solving and starts feeling like following a path that already accounts for the problems. The obvious objection shows up here. What if I don't have a full workshop? What if my tools are basic? What if I've already failed with plans before? That concern is usually valid, because most people don't struggle with woodworking in general. They struggle with inconsistent instructions that assume more than they actually explain. There are cases of beginners working in small garages, limited tools, limited space, who were able to complete basic furniture projects simply because the instructions removed ambiguity. One person started with a simple bookshelf project and finished it without needing to redesign anything mid-build. Another worked through multiple small outdoor builds over time, not because they suddenly improved their skills, but because the structure stayed consistent from project to project. And that's the real pattern. When instructions are stable, the builder looks more skilled than they are, not because anything changed in their ability, but because fewer decisions are left open-ended during the build. That's what shifts outcomes. If nothing changes, the next few months look familiar. A few more projects attempted on weekends, some completed halfway, some abandoned, a few successful builds mixed in, but not enough to build momentum. More time spent adjusting than actually building, more uncertainty than clarity, and the same quiet thought returning after each attempt. Why is this still harder than it should be? But when the structure changes, when instructions stop leaving gaps, the entire experience shifts. Projects move from planning to execution, from guessing to following, not perfectly every time, but consistently enough that finishing becomes normal again. And at some point, it stops feeling like you're fighting the process. You're just building. And it's worth recognizing something here. You've already been doing the hard part, showing up, trying, starting again. The missing piece was never effort. Looking back, most frustration in woodworking isn't from failure. It's from trying to succeed without complete guidance. And once that becomes clear, the next step is no longer complicated. It just becomes practical. There's a system built around fully structured woodworking plans that removes a lot of the guesswork from the process. If you want to see how that structure looks in practice, it's referenced in the description. No pressure around it, just information. If this helped clarify anything, feel free to like, subscribe, or share your experience in the comments. It helps shape what gets covered next.